evening, everyone. First question, probably just need to find out about is when and where was the piece written?
Okay, the Britten Violin Concerto was written in 1938/39, over about a period of sort of 18 months or so. And it was, the manuscript actually has a Canadian location as the final, on the final page, but most of it was written in the United States, although it started before Britain left for the US. I think that was in early 1939. But it is, the date, as I hope we'll be able to explain, is very significant. 1939 means only one thing to most people, and it's very present in this piece. Well, the Spanish Civil War, 1937-38, was very much in Britain's mind as much as anybody else's mind, and with events in Germany taking a worse turn by the day, and as the world sort of got tipped into the Second World War, this is absolutely the period of time we're dealing with.
And do you think Britain was very influenced by?
Absolutely. I can't think of another piece of music which is so specific to a date. 1939 seems to be written all over every page of the score. And not only in terms of looking forwards to what might be or what seemed increasingly likely to happen, but which of course people could still only guess at. What really haunts the piece is what has already happened in Spain, the ghastly civil war, which was to most people the first glimpse of what modern warfare was going to be like. Civilians dying in dreadful situations, and all the rest of the horrors that we now know all about. So it's kind of pivotally placed. It looks back, refers to what's going on in Spain, and looks forward to what might be about to happen, everywhere else.
We can touch on that a bit more later on, but could you tell us more personally what was going on in Britain's life at the time, as well as these external events?
Yeah, well, it's quite shocking. I'm just very interested. Does anybody here know the piece well? I mean, or even heard a performance before? I guess not many people have heard performances. Not many people even know that Britten wrote a violin concerto. Sorry, what was the question? What was going on in his life? Yeah, well, the shocking thing is that for such a serious piece of music, I mean, this is a piece of music which seems to have sort of wisdom and old age written all over it. It was actually written by a 26-year-old. This is absolutely staggering, not only for the sort of content it has, but for the sheer kind of perfection of the craft as well. So as a 26-year-old, what was going on in Britain's life was that he had a period of, he'd studied, he hadn't managed to study with Alban Berg, which, due to Alban Berg sadly dying, he couldn't go to Vienna and study there. He wanted very much to study with Berg and really get involved with what was going on in the middle of Europe. He really wanted to, I think, kind of burst free of Great Britain and the English sea. But nevertheless, he had already some sort of a career as a sort of brilliant young composer. And in fact, when I was chatting to Donald Mitchell, who is the person who's edited all of Britain's letters, interesting, very interesting man, he was saying how dogged Britain was by that wonderful sort of faint praise when somebody is called brilliant. Nearly always the implication is that they're also rather empty, or they're very clever, which Britain is also called. It's also a sort of backhanded way of saying that somebody doesn't have substance or seriousness. And Donald Mitchell said that actually Britain was incredibly hurt by that, I think in some senses this piece is almost a deliberate attempt to say something very serious and very worldly and very wise. I guess the other pivotal thing was that his relationship with Peter Pears was getting underway in a serious way. They'd known each other for a while, but it was whilst they were both in the United States that relationship really gelled and became, the lifelong partnership that dominated both their lives. So this falls absolutely going to the United States. Britain had gone to the United States, as I said, early in 1939. It's difficult actually to really disentangle what his motives were. He felt that the English scene was a bit stale. He felt this was a way of, setting sail to new lands, new opportunities. But also, it was very difficult, I think, and it is very difficult to escape the idea that he was, to some extent, excusing himself from what was going on in Europe and what, he was already a conviction pacifist. He did not want to fight. He did not like the idea of war. And as that whole thing was brewing up, he jumped ship in a way, as many people have said later on. Although, again, I refer back to Donald Mitchell. He said, no, Britain was just going to further his career, it was new opportunities and so on. But I think it's much more ambiguous than that.
There were so many different things going on in his life at that time. It seems as if it was a pretty formative period for him. In a way, possibly leaving the country, leaving England, might have sort of helped to helped him to find himself.
I think he was definitely looking for a new kind of a new beginning. Ultimately, he didn't find it in the US. He came back in 1942, very, very homesick, and still really searching for that sort of pivotal kind of place to hang his career, but not just his career, his whole personal life on. And that's what became, of course, his home in Suffolk and the festival and all that kind of thing, which was very much to do with surrounding himself with sympathetic people, isolating himself in a way from criticism and the whole sort of London scene, very much having things on his own terms. But that was still in the future. Whilst this piece was being written and whilst he was in the US, he does seem to be still pretty rootless, pretty uncertain about the directions he's going in. Also, very interestingly, I have a feeling that people get ill when they're unhappy or ill at ease. And Britten was often not a well person. He did go down with sort of colds and flus and things. But he got very, very ill at around the time he was writing this piece, and he was only just able to attend the premiere in New York because he had a temperature of 104 or something only 2 weeks before, and was really desperately unwell.
Speaking of which, could you tell us, was this piece commissioned? Who did the first performance?
It wasn't actually a commission, although a violinist, a Spanish violinist, someone who's now kind of slipped out of the sort of world rankings for various reasons, Antonio Brosa was the soloist of the first performance, and also collaborated very extensively with Britten on the writing of the concerto, and it was really, his influence is written into a lot of the solo parts. He championed the work. Also on board was John Barbaroli, who at that time was music director of the New York Philharmonic. And it was actually Barbaroli, I think, who pushed very hard to get the premiere done by the New York Philharmonic in Carnegie Hall. And probably up to that time, that was one of the biggest occasions and biggest dates in Britain's life, was this big premiere. And it was a success. It went down very well. Critics liked it. They thought it was a fine and serious piece and a real addition to the repertoire and so on.
Could you tell us more now about the piece itself and this? Was it written in a conventional form? Was its content conventional?
Well, going back a little bit to what we were saying about 1939 and the kind of perspective of wartime and so on, and I said that it's written all over it, and in a sense, that also has something to do with the shape of the piece. It's a little bit conventional. I mean, the idea of a sort of moderately paced first movement, followed by a really sort of wild, fast and aggressive middle movement, followed by, in turn, a kind of synthesis movement which tries to put elements together that you've already heard, is not entirely an untried one. I mean, I can think of another violin concerto by Prokofiev, the first D major concerto by Prokofiev, which has a similar kind of shape. But I think what's unconventional is what happens to the piece after about halfway. So as I said, there's a first movement which in many ways is quite conventional, then this wild kind of death dance scherzo thing, which is really very aggressive and very scary in a way. But it's what happens after that which is so unusual. Britten calls the last movement Passacaglia. And Passacaglia, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is basically a kind of set of variations. The idea is that you have a bass, a ground bass, which remains the same and is repeated, over which you lay different characters, different figurations and so on. Britten treats it quite freely even here. But that form, the Passacaglia form, is to become really quite a signature for him. I mean, he used it in Peter Grimes, he uses it in the string quartets, last string quartet, and in numerous other places. I think Death in Venice has one. So throughout his life, and this is the first time he used that form, he used that form to kind of do what this movement does, which is to kind of sum things up. But more than summing things up, it presents a kind of synthesis of what's gone before, and a sort of conclusion, like what does this all mean? How are we to digest what's gone? And I also have a strong feeling in this piece that we're dealing with a sort of time frame where the first two movements, if you like, are sort of in the past tense. We're talking about things that have happened. And then you have the cadenza, which links the second movement into the last movement. And the cadenza is sort of pivotal in bringing us into the present tense, where we look towards the future. And we look towards the future with incredible fear, uncertainty, and great trepidation. And the piece really ends with a really peculiar, sort of ambiguous mood, which is far better expressed by Britten in music than I can in words, but you will see it. It's a very strange place you're left in. It's kind of like being on a sort of ledge where you're looking down a great distance to ghastly things beneath you, and looking up, if you like, to you don't know what, but you have a pretty good idea it's not very good. And just again to say 1939, I think we can see what he's driving at.